Hey, everybody out there. We have with us some very special guests to talk about the state of news today and whether people really believe in what's being told to them. And to my left on my screen, we have Nikki Stone, who's the radio talk show host daily on WILK News Radio. It's Talk Radio with Nikki show from noon to 3 every day on WILK 103.1 FM. If you're not in the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area, you can get it online. And also, we have, and who's this?
Aren't they beautiful?
This is Callie.
Who was
Callie and Axel are with me today.
Okay. And also now we have Bryant Thomas, who is most lately with the AP News Bureau in Washington, D.C. He's worked in major markets in radio, including Hartford, Connecticut. So Brian has a vast experience with politics on the national, state, and local level and keeps up to date on what's going on in Washington and around the country. So what we're talking about today is a recent AP News article, the organization that Bryant worked for, which says the headline is "Study shows a striking number of people believe that the news misinforms, and this number is growing. Among the statistics, half of Americans, 50%, say that national media intends to mislead, misinform, or persuade the public to adopt a particular point of view, and it is intentional. Only 25% of those surveyed disagree with that. So, Bryant, this is an AP article. The AP carries a lot of news that I think is slanted, increasingly so. You were with the AP. What do you say?
Well, I don't think it's slanted. I think they're following the lead of the herd. And, that's going on throughout the media today. So this is not uncommon. But the Gallup poll you refer to indicates that 34% have a great deal or a fair amount of confidence in the media. And for the first time, those who do not have confidence is at 38%. First time that the naysayers have been on top since Gallup started these polls a number of years ago. Not surprising. When you have a president who began his campaign saying fake news, and you had a steady drumbeat of that for 5.5 years, what would you expect?
But Brian, we both have been in the media a long time. It is fake news, largely, or at least much more so than it used to be. And Nikki finds this in her radio show. A lot of people calling in with the distrust of the news, and she sees herself locally in the Scranton area and also nationally how the news is slanted. What do you say, Nikki?
It seems to me like it's very slanted to one side when you talk about the major media companies. And they're not asking enough questions to get to the truth of the matter. They're just accepting what they're being told. And a lot of cases, common sense tells you it doesn't seem right. Yet the media is giving us the same narrative over and over again. And I think we've seen enough examples where, yeah, it is fake news. But nobody wants to go against the agenda or the narrative.
Well, what I point to repeatedly, a prime example, no matter what else you think about Trump or Biden, whatever politics you embrace, to me, it's undeniable that the mainstream media, except for Fox News and the New York Post as a newspaper and a few other outlets, but the major media squelched that story before the election because they didn't want Biden to lose that election. The Hunter Biden laptop, they knew about it before the election, that it was legitimate. And what was damaging on there was not so much about Hunter Biden and his perversions, but about what it indicated about deals that he was making that his father, as a sitting vice president, benefited from, and that was squelched. Brian, can you deny that?
I don't deny it at all. I think we need to know more. And the problem with all of that is that now it is so tainted with political, rhetoric that you're not going to get a straight answer from anybody. That's my problem with it.
But doesn't that indicate what's going on with mainstream media, how biased and how political it is? They become cheerleaders and propagandists for the political party that they embrace, and it's not straight news reporting anymore.
Well, I think if you go back, and we talked about this off mic, I think before we decided to do this, go back to the 70s. You and I can remember the 70s. I can remember when Patrick Buchanan was installed as the White House telecommunications director under Richard Nixon. With no experience in the media whatsoever, he freely admitted that. And he also said in the same breath that he didn't even watch television news or television itself, except for Saturday mornings at the office.
Yeah.
Now, the question remains, what did he watch? Pink Panther, Heckle and Jekyll? You know, and this jerk was in charge of White House telecommunications policy. So if you go back and you look at people like that and say, here they are, let's accept them as credible. You know, I'm sorry, it started a long time ago, and it might be worse now than it ever was before, but there has always been this problem with Republicans not liking the press because they don't sing the same tune the Republicans are singing.
Okay, Brian, you've got to make a distinction between the slants that come out of the White House, no matter who's in office, and the news media that covers it. The danger here, and the real egregious sin here, is that the news media isn't reporting anything straight. Now, you expect who's ever in the White House to be slanting it their own way, coloring it their own way, using all kinds of euphemisms, all kinds of misinformation. You expect that, but you're not supposed to expect and accept the press going along with a lie from the White House because it's their favorite candidate, or denying the truth of something that comes out of the White House because it's their unfavored candidate. And that is clearly what's going on. Nikki, what do you think?
Well, I think clearly it's going on because had it been somebody like a Trump that had a background like Biden has, plagiarizing in college, couldn't even run for president the last time he tried to run for president because of his plagiarism and stuff like that. We didn't hear that repeated over and over again. It was hidden. The stuff about him with a bill that was passed that was actually harder, was pretty racist on for criminals with a background back when he was a senator. That wasn't repeated over and over again. We just kept hearing bad Trump and Stormy Daniels over and over again and didn't get. So it's clear that there's been a narrative since, at least since Biden was running for this time around. We don't know how far I'm sure it goes back even farther, like Bryant was saying, but I think it's becoming clearer and clearer to most of us that it's kind of hard to trust a lot of what's given to us. It's difficult to do the research.
Nikki, a lot of your callers tend to be conservative and Trump supporters or DeSantis supporters. Now, even though the Scranton area voted for Biden, most of your callers tend to be on the conservative side, some of them very conservative. How do you explain that disconnect between the Biden vote in the Scranton area and your callers?
It's almost not just callers, but people that you meet on the street, because we all know that your callers are less than 10%. You know, the text message is less than 10% of your audience, but it's when you go out in public and also hear from people and you look around and you see the yard signs that were out there. Did really all those people not actually vote? They just put signs in their yard? Did all those people who were talking to me not vote? Many of them did vote. So there doesn't seem to be a good explanation for the disconnect.
Now you're drifting into a conspiracy theory here that the election was fixed.
Every time we open our mouths to ask a question or point out an observation that we made with our own two eyes, we are all of a sudden called conspiracy theorists in today's world. And I think that's a way to just keep us quiet because we don't want to be labeled like that.
Brian, a retort to what Nikki just said.
Well, I think there's a good deal of truth to that because the people who are Trump supporters are most vocal. among those who were involved in the 2020 election. There's no question about that. They made all the noise. But what I'm about to tell you now is that there was depositions given in the case involving Dominion voting machines versus Fox News. There's a big lawsuit going on for the with over $1 billion in damages, 1.6 billion being sought by Dominion against Fox. And one of the things that came out of this was that all of the top anchors at Fox, and that includes Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity, that they all thought that the narrative of the election was rigged and Trump actually won it was totally false. And yet it never made the air at Fox.
They themselves did not believe it was rigged, although they were
shockingly reckless. Fox News hosts privately shot down Trump's big lie over election fraud. USA Today.
They never said it was rigged. They questioned it.
They didn't say anything. They didn't repeat any of these opinions while they were discussing it off camera to their audiences. That's the rub right there.
Well, actually, I mean, they didn't repeat their opinions that it wasn't rigged, but they didn't say it was rigged. They were raising questions, and I still have questions about it. So, I mean, I don't consider that so egregious as the slants that the mainstream media puts in. And don't forget the Fox, as I've said before, Brian, the value of Fox is not so much that it itself is above board all the time and always gives you the full story, but they get stories out that the mainstream media won't cover, important, legitimate stories such as the Hunter Biden laptop, and you can't deny that. The other,
I don't deny it. All I'm saying is I don't know how big a role that story plays in the scheme of things with all of the problems we're facing in this country today. Well, I just don't see it.
It's indicative of how the news media, which is supposed to be a watchdog, favors one political party, namely Biden right now. And that actually had an effect on the election, according to some surveys where at least 17% said if they knew about the Hunter Biden laptop before the election, they would not have voted for Biden. In a close election, that would have thrown it to Trump. So that was election interference.
Well, that could well be. I'm not so sure that figure is accurate. But anyway, all I'm saying is that if Fox News wanted to play this correctly, they would have mentioned the fact that this election was a bunch of election fraud, was a bunch of crap being issued by the Trump people. So you had no movement from the right to the center. Finally, after a lot of the squawking about the Hunter Biden laptop and some of the other things that were embarrassing to the Biden administration, the border crisis and things like that, you've seen mainstream media, the ones you call the ones on the left, move toward covering the story. Fox never does that. They never go to the left.
Well, I mean, I don't want them to go either to the left or the right. I just want the media to act as an objective purveyor of facts and information, not slanted.
Well, you can't have that when somebody's pimping exclusively for the right.
So you're saying that if Fox is guilty of what you say, pimping for the right, then it justifies the mainstream media, MSNBC, CNN, etc., pimping for the left. That justifies it.
That's not what I'm saying at all. All I'm saying is that there's a reason for the alternate view on the left, and that is because of what Fox has done since the day they started almost.
So you're blaming Fox with its slant for inducing the MSNBC, CNN, the mainstream to go to pitch their propaganda. You're saying Fox is to blame for CNN's misinformation.
I'm saying that I don't call it CNN and MSNBC misinformation. You name it. You may not get the whole story the way you would like to see it, but you do get a point of view. And now, does that rise to the level of, the fourth estate watching over the other three branches of government? Probably not, but I think we abandoned that principle a long time ago.
Points of view are fine if they're labeled as such, as editorials, but you get points of view, editorial opinion inserted in what's supposed to be straight news stories. Nikki, you've seen that yourself.
We've seen definitely use of words that sway people's opinions, false claims. A claim is a claim. Claim does not need to be true nor false. It's a claim. You don't put the word false before it just so you could sway the opinion of somebody to believe that it's untrue. A claim is a claim. It's either false or it's true, but your opinion of it being false is telling other people it's false, and that has no place in a news story. And that's just one example that sticks at the top of my head. There's many of these stories that, with so many adjectives inserted, sway people's opinions.
Yeah, I mean, you read a supposedly straight news story, a lot of them from the AP, the disgraced President Trump. In whose eyes is he disgraced? In half the Americans' eyes, he's not disgraced. Trump's election lies. You could say alleged lies, but don't declare that they're lies automatically because he's Trump and you don't like him. This is what's going on in supposedly straight, objective news reporting. And to me, that's a mortal sin in journalism. I mean, where is all this heading?
Well, I think, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that Trump lies all the time.
There's
He gets
plenty of
caught.
evidence
He gets
that
caught all the time.
Wait, Biden has lied repeatedly
I'm
since
not,
the beginning, but we don't hear about that,
I'm
and we
not,
don't focus on it.
I'm not saying he doesn't lie. He's a seasoned Washington politician. If he doesn't lie, I'd be surprised.
He's
but-
more than seasoned. He lies more than most. He has lied so far in office almost 2 or 3 times as much as Trump ever did. And the things that Trump lied about were more exaggerations and didn't really have a bearing on the running of this of our government. A lot of them, when you look at the thing with the laptop that we keep dismissing, there is evidence on the laptop of connections with other countries and Hunter getting huge amounts of money that nobody knows why and who's the big guy. Who's the big guy? We all know who the big guy is, but nobody wants to talk about it. And that's detrimental to the United States. And all of their business dealings go back to daddy being in politics. Trump was in business way before he got into politics.
Yeah, we all know that. I just don't buy into the fact that Trump is anywhere near a qualified person to sit in the White House. We had 4 years of embarrassing rigmarole with that man, and the only thing you can point to in 4 years legislatively is that silly tax cut for the super rich. They did nothing else for 4 years, that Congress. Nothing.
That silly tax cut apparently pumped up the economy. It was doing well under Trump, no matter what you think about tax cuts for the rich. And I'm a lifelong liberal Democrat. I don't like the rich getting benefits and tax cuts. But if you look at the economy under Trump and the economy under Biden, it's like night and day.
Well, I don't think the economy under Biden is that bad at all. Where are you getting
Have you
that
gone grocery
information?
shop? Who does your grocery shopping? Who puts gas in your car?
We both do our grocery shopping.
You don't
Look, if you, here we go with the oil thing again. If you took the oil industry and put them aside, you wouldn't see any inflation at all. These oil traders were just itching to pull this trigger, and Ukraine gave them the reason to do it. Even when no amount of oil that was going to come from Ukraine to this country was a factor in the run-up of prices. We all know that, because there's no shortages. There were never any shortages. All you had to do was pay. So, I don't buy into this fact that you can blame Biden for that. You can blame the oil industry for that.
And all the money that Biden pumped into the economy, all this tremendous federal spending has no effect on inflation. Every economist will tell you that's the cause of inflation.
And what about the money that came in under Trump in the closing days of Trump? That didn't start under Biden.
It accelerated under Biden.
Well, no, of course.
Yeah.
By that time, we were deep in a recession.
Yeah, but it made it worse by pumping all that money in. And you see all the fraud now.
I don't see that.
The news is full of billions and billions of dollars in fraud, these giveaways for the shutdown.
Well, that's fraud is a separate thing. If you've got people who are going to game the system, they're going to do it no matter whether there's big money involved or not so much about big money involved. Gamers are always going to be there. The crooks have been with Medicare since day one, and we've always found them. So to say that it's all Biden's fault is crazy. That's just nuts.
Brian, you were at the AP, within the past,
10 years ago.
Years ago. Were you seeing bias creeping into supposedly straight news reporting then? Because to me, it's so obvious now. Was it starting back then?
No. As a matter of fact, there was a tendency, let's put it that way, to go along with the narrative that was always advanced by the right, only because Fox was coming up as a legitimate source for news in those days, and everybody said, well, we have to make absolutely sure that we get both sides of the story before we put it on the air. Well, if you did that, nobody would be putting a story on the air. So I think one of the main reasons that I had rows with my superiors there was the fact that we can put a story on the air involving either side of a political issue and worry about catching up with the other side later. That doesn't diminish the value of the story just because you can't get somebody else to squawk about it on the other side. I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. You make an attempt, but you don't let it dictate whether you use the story. No. Then if you're doing that, you're short-circuiting your own news judgment. That's crazy.
So what are you saying? That AP back then was you wouldn't go with a story publicly unless you had a comment from both sides?
That was the tendency. And I had many discussions with some of my supervisors in Washington that, look, if you want to do this, you're not going to have any tape for audio on the radio network because you're not going to be able to get anybody.
Well, I mean, for years, I was in print, I was in radio before I got into TV. And the going device was you'd quote somebody from one side, and if the other side, if you attempted to reach the other side and they didn't respond, you just note that we attempted for comment from the other side, there was no response, and you put that in. There's no problem. There's nothing new about that. I don't know how AP considered that verboten.
It was not verboten. It was just a tendency they had, especially when it came to stories involving Democrats who were taking snipes at the Bush administration during the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. That's where the big issues came into play.
All right. So looking at AP now, the stories, which our local newspaper carries a lot of them, and I find them highly slanted. Do you see this in these reports, or do you think they're pretty fair and even balanced?
I think they're more opinionated than they were when I was there, but I don't think they're anywhere near as bad as what you see in some of the newspapers in like the Post and things like that. I don't think they're anywhere near that bad.
Nikki, you're familiar with the local news reporting, newspaper and radio and TV. How do you see this balance playing out in recent years?
I have seen more, like I was pointing out before, you see more of those adjectives popping up that maybe to some isn't so obvious, but to those of us who went to school for journalism, you're like, you don't put that word there. That's slants and opinion. Although on Bryant's point, when you try to get both sides of a story, and even though I'm a talk show host and opinion aided to a certain extent, because I use my common sense to look through things, and I'm allowed to do that. It is also hard. I'm open to have the other side that doesn't agree with necessarily my side, because I was a Democrat myself and would like to hear both sides. I would like to believe I would vote for either candidate myself as a person. When you invite somebody from the other side to come in to speak, they're not that willing to come in if they don't think that you're going to go 100% for their platform. And I was even told by one Democrat who did come into my studio that they were advised by the party not to come on my show. So it is hard to do that balance if those are your players.
Yeah.
I think she's right. I think that if you look at Fox, I don't ever see Democrats on Fox. If they are there, boy, it's very infrequent. And once in a while you see Republicans on CNN and MSNBC, but likewise not very often.
Exactly, which is the problem. Both sides are not playing it straight. But again, the value of Fox is, despite their slant, despite their agenda, despite their political preferences, they're at least covering stories that are being squelched by the other side. And once again, prime example is the Hunter Biden laptop story. Those 51 so-called intelligence experts that signed that letter, that it had all the earmarks of Russian disinformation, they knew that was baloney. And yet, this is what I'm saying. And and nobody in the mainstream media except Fox and the New York Post questioned the authority of those 51 intelligence experts, CIA heads, and all that, with all this baloney to prop up Biden. This is what's going on, and the media is complicit in this.
Well, what about all of the people who are trying to prop up Trump now again? It goes on and on and on. This is just a vicious circle, and I don't know what the solution is.
Well, according to the same Gallup poll that we're talking about, Democrats, no surprise, trust the news more than Republicans. But even more significant now, the same survey showed that independents now have less trust. 55% of independents now say that there's a great deal of bias in mainstream media reporting. And in 2017, only 45% of independents felt that way. So even the independents are souring on what's purportedly straight news reporting.
Well, yeah, of course, we hear this drumbeat day in and day out. Fake news, fake news, fake news. It sinks in. Here's the proof.
But Trump was, although Trump may have been regurgitating his own fake statements at times, his overall accusation of fake news was largely true. It was fake news, incomplete news. And another way of slanting the news, which I've said a number of times, is not so much sins of commission, but sins of omission. It's what you leave out of the story that could shape it. And that's another dishonest way of shaping the news. And that goes on all the time.
Well, I think we're in a dangerous place. I don't know what the solution is. We've talked about this off camera before. All I'm saying is that if everybody believes that the other side is goony, then we're in a real pickle here. And I don't know what the solution is. All I know is that when we reach the point where 80-90% of the public thinks there's no value in news, then what's the point of having an industry that covers news?
Trump got in largely because of the working class and middle class felt disenfranchised. Now, Nikki deals with these people every day who call into her show. Scranton is a distressed area in respects. It's lower income, working class. The traditional industries are long gone, and it's struggling. So of course there's that resentment. Like, what is the government doing for us? And Nikki, you could talk more about that.
Right. They're asking questions, which I find that you get people who want to, when you say people who don't trust the media and the Democrats trust it the most, those are the ones that I'm getting text messages from, and it's only a smaller percent of text messages from them that say you're a conspiracy theorist, you're questioning too much. But we need to question, because that's the only way we can get to the real answers, or have a fight to get something that protects the working class people. They don't feel like they have any representation. They feel like we're being taxed to death, and every time we turn around, you're watching the news and there's a trillion thrown out here and a trillion thrown out there, and we're left to ask the question, where's that trillion coming from, and how come it's not coming back in my pocket? Not that they want, not for handouts, but via the paycheck that you work hard for. And they're feeling pretty much abandoned because of that. But my question, when you ask about the media, and it's sad that nobody can trust the media, but then we come down to the policing of the media, the censorship that people have talked about, you had Twitter has been found to have been hiding information from people. And thank God Elon Musk got in there and he has the files. But Facebook doing the same thing, deciding on their own what is true or false. And if you see that one side, when you say whether they get it from Facebook or not, I don't trust Joe Schmo down the streets opinion on something. But if somebody shares a valid news story, and that valid news story now cannot be found on Facebook because Facebook deemed it untrue, even though it was true, isn't good either.
Yeah. And there's more and more of that censorship. And, this is another, before we get into that, though, I also want to point out the softball questions that are asked on both sides of the media, even on Fox News, because they have their favorite candidates, as Bryant says, that's true. And, they don't really grill them. And the mainstream media, the liberal media, CNN, MSNBC, softball questions there. Now, Brian, we have a history of really rocking boats and getting in trouble for it, for asking hard questions and pinning politicians. And, we got a lot of flack for that, but I don't see anybody doing that anymore.
We don't get paid enough to do it.
It not only that, but it's dangerous if you want a career. And that's what I found out, the hard way when I got bounced out of ATR in Waterbury. So, in retrospect, I landed on my feet. I spent 20 years at TIC in Hartford and 20 more down at the AP in Washington. But many people who get the axe are not as lucky.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of my history too, which I won't go into. But yeah, I mean, I've had a big cost in doing what reporters should do, is asking tough questions and not being intimidated by those in power. But there's so little of that anymore. Even on the national media, where they've got this podium, they should have the protection to pursue politicians and hold their feet to the fire. But again, they become cheerleaders and propagandists instead of going after them. I mean, investigative reporting is a joke now. And
people who don't toe the line are frozen out of the news stream. Yeah. And they say, we're not going to talk to you at all. And that's, then you get into trouble with your boss because you're not delivering product. And so you're right, it's a vicious cycle. What's the solution? Who the hell knows?
Yeah, another complication here is how people are getting their news today. Now, in an era where news is so available in so many platforms, people are actually less informed, these surveys show. People getting their news today, according to the Gallup poll that we're talking about, 58% online, 31% TV, 7% radio, and get this, just 3% newspapers and magazines. Newspapers used to be the mainstream source. Now it's down to 3%. And despite the promise of the internet to have so much information available, there's so much out there that's confusing or purposely misleading. I'm the first to admit that. There's so many sites on the internet that are total junk And unless you're a discriminating consumer of news, which you have to put a lot of time into, you don't know what's information and what's misinformation. So that's complicating the picture as well.
And there's no vetting either. That's the problem. They don't vet stories. They don't vet sources. They just accept it as gospel because some official says it or because it's something they want to hear themselves, whatever the reason. And that's disturbing because, Goebbels could have made a mint with this gang.
Yeah. And, even more disturbing, Generation Z, 18 to 25-year-olds, 88% of them get their news online. Online, 88%.
My grandchildren, perfect example.
Yeah. So, that's a forest of obstacles and misinformation. Nikki, on your show, do you see any delineation between the younger people that call in and the older people, their attitudes and their views and what they swallow readily and what they question?
You could definitely see a difference between the ages, where the older generation seems to question more because it's totally different than what they remember from when they were younger, especially when they're watching the news and they're hearing more opinions come in. And older people probably still going toward the newspaper and the print places. I do get a lot of people sending me different clips from the internet, TikTok, YouTube videos, but then also various different sources that I have to determine whether I need to read that or not, or do I put it to the side and try to do my own comparisons between. And I will take myself CNN, Fox News, some of the mainstreams, and then maybe compare it to one of the other things like the Blaze that's out there, Rumble, which you have out there, all the different ones that you can, and then try to come up with where to start this conversation. And some of these alternate news sources are good sources to show you where you can be asking questions. And because if we stop asking questions, we've just kind of given our freedom away. We need to be able to ask those questions. Otherwise, you never get to the answers of anything.
And the problem also that compounds all this is, especially among the younger generation in schools now, even in universities, they're being told what to think, not how to think, which used to be the hallmark, the basis of a classical liberal arts education, teaching you how to analyze things, how to think, not what to think. But now all this propaganda is being shoved down their throat. And if it's not politically correct, you're condemned. You could even lose your job over it. And so it's a worsening situation.
Critical thinking skills are at an all-time low.
Yeah.
If you take a step back and you say to yourself, all right, here's a story about something. Doesn't matter what the story is. You make an editorial decision the minute you say to yourself, all right, I'm going to take this story and write it up. I'm going to take this story and pursue it and talk to people on both sides of the issue. That's an editorial decision right there. Because you've decided as a journalist that other people need to know what this is all about. Now, if you take that to its final position, which is what we're at today with left and right, some of that objectivity goes away, and it's going to be very hard to get that neutrality back again without alienating one side or the other. The minute you step to the left, the right's going to squawk. The minute you go to the left, the right's going to squawk. So it's very hard to take a position like we used to in journalism and apply it to today. I don't see that happening anymore.
Nikki, you've been in talk radio for a number of years now. Over the years, have you perceived that people are less or more informed, less or more angry and dissatisfied?
And it definitely more angry and dissatisfied. That's an easy question. People who choose to be informed are more informed. people who choose not to be, and they're the people who accept things as they are. And this is just not, politics. I could talk health on the air, and I could share my own personal health story about the medical industry, and people will doubt what I experienced firsthand. But I mean, I could take this back to 1989 when I was working at an AM station, running Larry King overnights. And when they were first talking about AIDS in the Wyoming Valley, like the late 1980s, 88, 89.
Wyoming Valley.
Looks very Scranton area. But we were running PSAs about AIDS and I believe how to get help. Well, we weren't. The satellite was. Would come over with the Larry King show or any of our syndicated programs. We were told, because we still had board ops back then, and you'd have to board up this stuff, that under no uncertain circumstances, you needed to cover those PSAs because the Valley wasn't ready to hear it. And at the same time, I knew someone who was dying of AIDS. Mm-hmm. And we were told we needed to hide it because the people who ran the station thought that people weren't ready for it when it was here. And if I look back now, I mean, I was only like 18, 19 years old at the time. I keep thinking, why didn't I quit my job then? Because I knew that like I was doing something wrong. But like you said, you had to be fearful. I was just getting started in the business. Would have I been able to move through the business? I have that story to share now to say, yes, I witnessed this stuff firsthand. So were we ever really informed is the question, Larry.
Yeah. Also, Brian, you know a lot about the fairness doctrine and also what Clinton did in consolidating the media. Now, the fairness doctrine was largely struck down. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? Explain what it was and the effect that you think it had.
Well, the idea with the fairness doctrine was to make sure that both sides of an issue got an opportunity to have the same bully pulpit to postulate a specific issue. That's all. Nothing more than that. Very simple. And it grew out of political consideration more than anything else, rather than covering news stories that were non-political in nature. So
what you had to do then was, if you interviewed a Democrat on an issue, you were required to interview a Republican, correct?
Or make an attempt to get that person,
right?
Which was a good idea. Is a good idea. Why shouldn't you have both sides talk about an issue? And I think when the fairness doctrine went away with and the support of many people on the Hill with the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which allowed this homogenization of news product to go on the Bird, and you had the Rush Limbaughs and the not so much Sean Hannity, but the other one, G. Gordon Liddy, and all these other people, Dr. Laura. All of these people became easy to put on the air because they came with advertising packages attached. So all of a sudden you've got programming that is disconnected from the local communities that these radio stations served. They ceased to become public trustees, which is the whole bailiwick of radio and television licenses to begin with. They were supposed to be public trustees. That's gone. That doesn't exist anymore. So therefore, we have a problem now with re-educating the public in the scope of how they were screwed by the passage of this bill in 1996. And that's a tough, tall order. There were 4 parts to it. And Clinton and Gore were championing the first part of it, which was the crash program to expand the internet, bring it to more people, do it at reasonable cost. And they were just doing cartwheels over this. The other 3 parts of the Telecommunications Act allowed for multiple ownership, hundreds of radio stations, in fact, in many places. And what that destroyed was the fact that the public trustee aspect of radio and television licensing was out the window. And Democrats didn't see that coming until it was too late.
All right. So what did it cause a merging of independent radio stations with they were strung together, and it ended up what 6 large corporations now control over 90% of the media.
That's correct.
So before, what was it, 6, 6, and 6 rule about
7, 7, 7, and 7. You could own 7 AMs, 7 FMs, and 7 TVs. And
in one market?
no, in a multiple of markets. It didn't have to be 7 in the same spot.
Right.
No, but you could have no more than 21 total. And that got tossed out the window with the Telecommunications Act of 96. So then you had, and I can speak from experience because American Radio started acquiring stations from their home base in Boston, and they started gobbling up Boston radio stations and firing news departments, gutting them down to 2 or 3 people just to say they had, a news department. And in the meantime, the public trustee factor just disappeared. Nobody could go to a radio station with a complaint about a car dealership, about pollution, about anything, about a politician, about anything. That venue was lost. And by the time the public realized it was lost, it was way too late.
Nikki, you experienced some of that?
Well, yeah, I watched it happen. I think something happened though that they cannot own so many in the same market now as they once were able to, with that. But it's still not great because it's these corporations. But I've watched perfectly great companies that the money was promising. They sold off to a big corporation and they lost good people. Mm-hmm. And then replaced with satellite or some other canned version. We are really where I work now, totally blessed to have from 6 a.m. in the morning till 6 p.m. at night, nothing but local radio. But that does not happen in every market around the United States. It happens.
Oh, no.
This is a rarity.
That's
that
correct.
You have this in the Wilkes-Barre Scranton market, and we are blessed to at least have the open phone lines and open for people to call in and talk. For somebody yesterday to call me and complain because their UGI electric bill is going to go up again another 8.9%, and why? So at least they have that place to vent and bring it to the attention of other people and tell other people what they can do about it. But that won't happen in a lot of communities. And it's sad. And radio and TV set up to support their communities. And I've said this for many years. One thing that radio and TV have been doing very poorly is supporting their communities, doing what they should be doing.
They don't have to. It's
right.
That simple. They don't have to.
I mean, the requirements are still there to fulfill it, but they're so minuscule that it's
nobody's
sad.
enforcing it. Nobody's enforcing it. That's the problem.
Too.
That's
too.
The problem.
I mean, because I am like the type of person, even when I work music radio and entertainment radio, every, fire company, bazaar, carnival, chicken barbecue is important because people make it happen. And those organizations are important to those people. And those are the type of PSAs and things that we should be talking about. In addition to, there's a water main break down the road and this politician's running for office. It is sad.
Final thoughts. The state of news today, is it something to be encouraged by, or is it something to dread what's ahead? How bad will it get, and how rapidly will it continue going downhill? I'll start off. I think we've reached a point now where it's a mess. It's getting worse. And it's a mixture of some of the public waking up to the misinformation, others embracing it, and with the dollars involved in delivering an audience, a niche audience, which Fox pioneered, they figured the conservative audience would be enough to be a success. Then, as Brian pointed out, the left followed suit in getting a niche audience on the left, and that again, polarized information rather than having it straight down the middle and objective. So I just think that it's going to continue, and I don't see it getting any better. Nikki, what do you think?
I sort of dread a little bit of what's ahead, but we've got to fight for this somehow, some way, that the next generation knows the right thing to do and how to come to, like, I try to encourage people not to stop asking questions. You can't always believe, like they always said, you can't believe what's on the internet. Well, you can't always believe what's in print. So to teach those critical thinking skills to the generations to come, that should not be a lost art, and it should be encouraged. We are in scary territory, most definitely. And I hope that it does come around, but it's hard to say where the resolve in it is.
Brian, I think they are pretty much of the same mind. Do you see it the same way?
I think she's right on the money. I think here's the issue. Ignorance is bliss, and there's an awful lot of happy people in this country right now. And I think that's very sad. And because on both sides, both left and right, and an equal number probably in the center, but you must always remember to challenge what is being said on the TV, on the radio, in the newspaper. Take it all with a grain of salt, double up on your fact checking. And if you see something wrong, don't be afraid to complain. Fox News made, or not so much Fox News, but Rush Limbaugh made that a credo for his program. If you think you don't like anything on a local level, call the station and complain. And I know that worked because we got the complaints where I worked.
Most people are conservatives.
Can I say one more thing? We have to remember that there are, though, always 2, maybe 3, 4, 5 sides to every story. And we can't let people forget that. We can't let people forget that. So it's good to see the different angles to a certain extent too.
Yeah, but I think, we're in shaky territory here. It'll probably get worse before it begins to get better. But it also, if you look at the Gallup poll, you have to look at how the questions were asked, what questions were asked, where the samples were taken. All of these things make a big difference as to the result of the polls,
But I think it's obvious. I think it's obvious that people trust the news less and less because of what we've been discussing.
Mm-hmm.
It's also what's going on. Talk about the younger generation. Nikki's saying that they've got to learn to question things, to think analytically. But the problem is, there are reports that even journalism professors now are telling their students, journalism students, it's not necessary to be objective in the interests of social justice. In other words, you could slant a story if the result that you're trying to achieve is justified in terms of social justice. So therefore, objectivity is no longer valued or encouraged. So where does that leave us for getting the truth out of any kind of a news story?
Yeah, if that's truly going on a widespread basis throughout the journalism schools in this country, then I want to know who has the playbook.
Yeah, well, I mean, social justice warriors, are proliferating in across the country in many organizations, in many activities. I mean, it's there, and people think, in order to achieve their brand, their concept of social justice, you could engage in what would previously be considered unethical or even illegal behavior. So anyway, it's not a bright note that we're ending on, but I think it was a very good discussion. And I thank Bryant Thomas for being with us, a longtime friend of mine, most recently with the AP News Bureau in Washington, D.C., and Nikki Stone, who could be heard daily if you're in the Scranton, Wilkes-Barre area or on the internet. She is on the WILK radio 103.1 FM from noontime to 3. It's a great show to listen to. I think this was a very good discussion to have. And I thank all of you, both of you, for being there, and all of you out there listening. Thanks very much. We'll talk again.
Great conversation. Thank you.
Good night.